You may have seen in the news that a lawyer today has just pleaded guilty to fraud and is going to be sentenced on December the 2nd. But what's going on there? Well, it's quite an interesting case. And I can go into some detail about what happened because the lawyer has actually been struck off by the Law Society after being, quotes, prosecuted by the SRA. He actually accepted that he should be struck off, and when I tell you the facts, you might not find it very surprising. But who is this guy? He's a guy called Phil Shiner. And he had a company called Public Interest Law. Now, I must make that clear in case there's any other Phil Shiners out there. Just make sure we're talking about the right one. But that was a solicitor's firm that specialised in bringing judicial review against the government, as in the public interest, hence the name. And they actually had the legal aid franchise to do this. Now, the way legal aid works now is firms actually bid, offer to be the franchisee in particular areas, both geographically and legally. And you get what we call legal aid deserts now, where there'll be like no family law firms who accept legal aid in an entire county. But the idea is there should be at least one family legal aid firm, one family criminal legal aid firm within sort of each county. But it is getting really, really bad. But he had the franchise to do this. And he brought a judicial review on behalf of some Iraqi people who had supposedly been involved in a massacre by the British forces over there. So how did he go about this, and what was the problem? Well, the problem is he just had a guy out in Iraq knocking on doors, going, hi, do you want to bring a claim against the British government? And if you do, we'll pay you £500. I mean, there's some dispute as to exactly what the quotes, the kickbacks were. But also, so this guy's going around, he's knocking on doors, and he's producing witness statements. And on the back of those, they're applying for legal aid to bring judicial review. Now, the problem was, first of all, there were just technical breaches of the rules. The guy in Iraq was getting a referral fee, as they euphemistically called it, for bringing all this work in. And there are very strict rules about how you do referral fees, and also about effectively cold calling clients. We don't have ambulance chasing per se in this country. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when barristers couldn't advertise their services. You couldn't even have business cards. The idea was it was very, very tacky. People should approach us if they have cases. We shouldn't be going out there touting for work. And what we used to do is we used to have people who would go out and solicit work for us. And that's where we get solicitor from. And also they used to solicit the courts and to do all the interim stuff. I'll have to do all the history of sort of the bar, solicitors, barristers, legal executives, the court, the inns of court, the inns of chancery, all those old types of lawyers we don't have anymore, like sergeants and things, there were types of judges. It's all very interesting. But yeah, he was basically getting referrals from this guy. They were agreeing to split any fees because he was then going to the Legal Services Commission, as it then was. Or actually it might have been the Legal Aid Authority back then, whatever it was called, and saying, I've got all these clients, they've all been, horribly abused, or their families have been murdered, and we want to bring a claim against the British government, vicariously liable for the actions of the army. And they rounded up loads of clients. And then they had the judicial review. And the courts, it's fair to say, had some problems with the judicial review because you've got a duty of frank candour when it comes to judicial review. You can't put forward a false claim. And interestingly, they instructed a guy called Rabinder Singh, who's now the first Sikh. And apparently that is the correct pronunciation. Sort of a guy on the High Court. I've been with some, he's a really nice guy. And he pointed out and said, there's big problems here. There's massive holes in this case. You've not done all your evidence gathering correctly. I mean, it transpired effectively they were just drafting the statements for these people. But the judicial review went ahead. It did fail because of all these problems. But they also had an inquiry on the back of it. And the inquiry cost £24 million. And at the inquiry, it transpired, they were interviewing these witnesses, they were saying, I don't know anything about it. Some guy said, I can get you some money if you just sign this witness statement. And it turned out that all the allegations, in the witness statements, all these people, they just knew nothing about this. They were just fake witnesses. But Mr. Shiner also obtained £3.6 million in legal aid. So when all this came to light, first of all, the legal, the Legal Services Commission, quite rightly, because as a public body they had been defrauded, so they are seeking to claw back the 3.6 million that they paid out to him. Like I said, there was a solicitor's disciplinary tribunal about this, where all this came to light. And he also got into trouble for not cooperating with the tribunal, and also putting in fake evidence to the solicitor's disciplinary tribunal. Again, they were backdating, creating fake emails to suggest that this referral arrangement was legal. I mean, he got into some trouble though, because it's how do you explain that all these statements are false, and there was lots of finger pointing and going, well, we were just acting on the information provided. How are we to know that this dodgy guy in Iraq wasn't, all he was cracked up to be? So it's fair to say the Solicitor's Disciplinary Tribunal took a very dim view of this, and they found him, in breach of lots of things. And the other thing they actually found him in breach of, and one of his partners, was these poor people. They said, you've also not been even updating them. Even if these were real clients, you've failed in your duty because you've not been telling them as to what's been going on the judicial review. You've not been keeping them informed as to the process, the progress of their own case, as unmeritorious and fake as it was. But they said, you should have at least written back and said, oh, just to let you know, the judge is very sceptical about your witness statements and doesn't believe anything you're saying, and now it's all come to light they're all forgeries. But they didn't even let them know, and that is actually a breach. So I found that quite interesting, that it's a breach not to inform your clients, even though it's a massive conspiracy. Now, there was no blame attached to the actual Iraqi people. They said, look, what were they meant to do? They just got told. Somebody came in and sort of said, you might get, there's some money to be had here. Who can blame them? And it's not like they're going to chase after them, out in Basra or wherever they are. But that's the position. So on the back of this, he's also been prosecuted now for the fraud. So what's likely to happen to him? Well, this is very serious fraud. And looking at the sentencing guidelines, aggravating features. Well, the first thing is, how much did you defraud? And if it's over £500,000, then that puts it into the top bracket. And like I say, here it's £3.6 million. And also, they might take into account the fact that they cost the taxpayer £24 million for this pointless inquiry. So, that will no doubt aggravate the sentence. There's also things like the level of sophistication, the level of planning. And this was a highly sophisticated fraud. There was a lot of effort put into it. It's not like just somebody turning up and saying, you've got a few roof tiles off, mate, it'll cost you £2,000 to put them right. This is very highly sophisticated. Also, the fact that his position of trust, he was abusing his position of trust as a solicitor. The fact that he was misleading the court deliberately in order to put the fraud forward. I mean, the starting point for this is 7 years. I mean, this is my sentencing by spreadsheet, but have a look at the sentencing guidelines, and the starting point would be 7 years. What's the mitigating factors? He's pleaded guilty, so he'll get his 1/3 discount for that. But there's probably not a lot of other mitigation. I mean, they did raise the fact of his ill health in the disciplinary proceedings, because obviously it's taken a toll on him. And they'll say, your career is in tatters. But, he's brought that all on himself, so the court's not going to be very sympathetic with that. He's getting on a bit, and you do get a bit of a discount because obviously a sentence in prison when you're older, it can quite often end up being a life sentence, can't it? But my guess is that the judge will say the starting point is 7 years, you're going to get your discount. So I think he's looking at 4.5 years. I mean, there might be some weird circumstances where they can reduce that. I mean, when it gets to that, because it's over 2 years, they couldn't make it a suspended sentence, so I don't think that's a possibility. But yeah, it has sort of brought shame on the profession, because we're always being accused of ambulance chasing, and this is a very obvious and sophisticated attempt to do that. And there's also the fact that effectively he's defaming troops. false allegations. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were some, issues with conduct in Iraq, but that was all being dealt with by the military. I mean, I used to do a lot of court-martial work back in there. And I'll have to sort of tell you about that, because I've got some quite amusing stories, obviously, as you can imagine. But yeah, taking all those into account, I think the court's likely to throw the book at him. So there you go. But obviously, I'll keep you updated, and we'll see what happens on December the 2nd. But anyway, as always, hope you found that vaguely useful, vaguely interesting, vaguely accurate, wildly infuriating. Where am I today? I'm at a place called Crowdgy, which is a really cool art centre. I've just come here because I've got some actual real legal work to do, and they've got a really nice cafe, and they do a really nice cake, but I'm just waiting for one to thaw out. It's some, I can't pronounce it, I've never heard of it before. It's some Italian thing, but apparently you have to keep it in the freezer. But there you go. I would have shown you around, but they're doing some building work, so you can probably hear angle grinders in the background. But it's an old school, and what you can do is you can rent the old classrooms to do all your arty things, and then they use like the old gym and the old assembly hall to put on exhibitions. It's a really nice place, and like I say, it's got an absolutely brilliant cafe, and you know what I'm like for coffee and cake.